To Every Church a Peace Church, a program that promotes the belief that the church could turn the world towards peace if the church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. Welcome back. I'm Don Edwards, the host for this program, and for the past 50 years, the Middle East has represented conflict, war, revenge, occupation. A place where it should represent a commonality of the one God spirit, a spirit of peace, of faith, of cooperation, of compassion, and of love. We're going to talk about the Middle East in this program from a very knowledgeable guest, Reverend Sandra Olewine, who is the liaison for the United Methodist Church in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem. Sandra lives in Bethlehem and has been there for the past 6 or 7 years, is it? Living in Bethlehem, the West Bank. She's also on the pastoral staff of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem.
Correct.
And welcome to Every Church a Peace Church, Sandra, and I'm glad that you're here. Sandra, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and how that led you apparently from the United States to spend your commitment of faith in the Middle East.
Well, as I began to ordain clergy and began to serve churches in California, as I wrestled with the gospel, it was very clear for me that the only way to do that faithfully was to also engage in what the issues were going on in the community around me. I served a small church out in Fontana, which is west of Los Angeles, or east of Los Angeles, and through a time of a lot of racial tension, and then went down and was working on similar issues in a large church in downtown Los Angeles, where I was working on both racial and economic justice issues, as well as a lot of interfaith issues. And the United Methodist Church has this position that's been in Jerusalem since 1987, in which we have really been sort of our main goal was to try to get people who come to that land to get off the tour bus. It really was in response to a plea from the heads of the Christian communities in the Holy Land who in the mid-'80s wrote and said, you know, millions of Christians come here every year, and they come and they run where Jesus walked. They imagine where he was, they imagine the Bible stories and the places that gave it birth, and they leave here and seem to never know there are people living here today. And in particular, they don't know there are Christians living here today, and they don't know that we're primarily Palestinian, and they don't know that means we primarily live under occupation. And what does that mean for life and witness of the church? And they don't meet Israelis or Palestinians, regardless of faith background, to find out what the hopes, the dreams, the fears of people are, and so that when they leave, they're not able to help us to be a part of trying to find a way out of the conflict and the destruction into a time of justice and peace and security for both peoples of the three traditions.
Yeah, it's like what you want to do is get, when Christians come, they don't want to just look at Bethlehem as an historical site, but really as a site where the history and the teachings of Jesus can be implemented.
Exactly.
Today, through an understanding of the people, an understanding of the situation, and perhaps looking into what are the solutions to this conflict, this deadly conflict that affects us worldwide. It seems it's just such a spot where faith has collapsed, where the monotheistic religions have shown that we have not lived up to what we should live up to in terms of honoring God at this place. How have you tried to work towards bringing people of faith to experience the teachings of Jesus there in Bethlehem and in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, our goal has been when people come, we get them basically off the bus to sit down and to meet with Christians, Muslims, and Jews living in the land, to hear their stories, to participate with them as they do try to go about being faithful to their traditions, because although we hear about the places and the disappointments and the failures, there are people there in all three communities who are actively engaged, trying to be faithful and lifting up not only their own humanity and their own dignity as people, but also trying to lift up the humanity and dignity of people on the other side. And trying to get people, when they come to visit, to meet those people, so that they become most inspired by their own ministry and witness that they're seeing from these folks, that when they leave and go back home, they too are then inspired to try to see how it is they can become active participants as we try to really move this conflict from a time of destruction and death to a time of hope and possibility.
Sandra, you have lived in Bethlehem now for many years. What is it like if you were to describe daily living there for yourself and for your neighbors? What is it like?
Well, we've gone through such a great deal of transition over the last 3 years, and right now it's a sort of a quieter time for us, but we're still in a period of time where you can't move. Bethlehem has been, as many of the Palestinian cities have been over the last 3 years, have been slowly incorporated under the wall that's being built, the security wall that the Israelis call it, the apartheid wall that the Palestinians call it. And so with also roadblocks and checkpoints at every exit from the town. And so that if you want to move from Bethlehem to go towards Jericho or Hebron or to Ramallah, there's no way out of the city. I mean, everything is blocked, and so that you have to have permits to move, to leave there. We are fortunate right now in that the military has moved from the Israeli military has moved from the middle of the city, where they are in the rest of the Palestinian areas, to the edges. So at least daily, since about June of 2003, we've not lived with the presence of the tanks and the armored personnel carriers and the jeeps roaming up and down the streets, which has relieved a little bit of the tension on people. But they still basically just means that sort of the prison guards move back to the edges of the prison, because it still feels like a prison for people because they can't go anywhere. It's also been devastating economically, because Bethlehem and the Bethlehem area is so much reliant on the tourist dollar and for their economic viability. And there's almost no visitors coming at this point in time, and so that the economic situation in Bethlehem, as well as across the West Bank and Gaza, is desperate at this point. And so you have a lot of people who are increasingly despairing, who are feeling frustrated. They can't, if they want to go anywhere, they have to ask permission from the military authorities. If they want to go even outside the country, it becomes even more difficult to try to get permission to travel outside. People aren't working, trying to get to universities. If people don't go to Bethlehem University, if they go to, say, the American University, which is in the northern part of the West Bank, it can take 18, 19 hours to travel now because of the roadblocks and curfew. It should take you 2 hours. And so people's whole lives have been turned upside down.
And of course, is Bethlehem typical of the other Palestinian areas, or worse or better?
Right now, probably we would say maybe we're better off, just because right now, as I said, that the military itself is pulled to the edges of the city, so we're not daily having to live with the encounters inside the cities, such as they are still in Nablus, Jenin, occasionally still in Ramallah, so that it's not quite as tight. It's not as bad as Kakilia, which Kakilia now is a town of 42,000 people that's completely surrounded by the wall. There's literally one gate in and out of that city, which has a lock and key, and it's closed usually at 6 o'clock at night and open at 6 a.m. in the morning, and people can't move at all out of that place. They're literally living in a prison. And so in many ways, we have it easier than people in some of the other cities currently. But it's not, we're not talking a large gradient here of better. It's slightly better, but not a large gradient.
The city, the town, Kakilia, how many people live there?
About 42,000.
42,000 people surrounded by a wall with one gate that's kept under lock and key.
Yeah. About half of it is the 8-meter high wall with about 25 feet, and the front part of it is like a wire chain fence. And there's one gate sort of on the eastern edge of the city. So that the people inside the city have to have permission to leave, to get out. It's not, and then the people who live in the villages who rely on the city also have to have permission to get in. So it's a very desperate situation.
Yeah, that's the sadness that marks this occupation. What possibilities? What would you suggest that people of faith, perhaps in the United States, what can we do to be a part of the movement towards peace and the movement of recognizing God's will of neighborly love?
Yeah. Well, there's I have an easy short list. I've been telling congregations of about five things. The first of them is to pray. Now, when I say pray, I don't just mean at Sunday worship we say we pray for peace and justice in the Middle East, for Israel, Palestine, and move on. I mean something a little bit more deeper than that. I think the sense of trying to find out, depending on what faith traditions people belong to, what's the work that's going on that churches or synagogues or mosques are supporting that are vital ministries of keeping hope and possibility alive. Find out what their needs are in those ministries. What are the families' names, and to make it very personal and to make it something that's very much constantly with us, as well as taking prayers to the street. I think that prayer vigils that join people together, that take things to the street with signs and so on, are a way of making our prayers public and a way of helping to raise people's awareness that what are the people standing on that corner? Why are they concerned about this issue? And it makes prayer is not just a private thing, but it becomes a public thing that we're really trying to engage in, putting people in the situation in the light of that which is holy and trying to lift it up. Secondly, right now is giving. Every organization, probably, and denomination, and Christian churches, and certainly in other faith traditions, have opportunities to support the various kinds of ministries that are going on there that are a part of hope building and peacemaking. And right now, the economic situation, particularly in the Palestinian areas, is so severe. The World Bank just released its figures for the first 3 quarters of 2003, and 60% of the Palestinian population are now living under the poverty line of less than $2 a day income. So the local people can't possibly support the ministries that they have on their own. So whether it's the schools, the hospitals, the youth centers, the trauma healing clinics, the vocational training centers, the refugee relief centers, conflict resolution centers, doing stuff on nonviolent action and so on, all of that which our faith communities help support, they need our assistance and they need our dollars to help do that. Third, people need to continue to study. Most people in the United States know next to nothing about this conflict. And the best way to study is come see us.
Not only this conflict, but a lot of conflicts.
Right, exactly. And a lot of times, because I think people think, well, that's something that happens over there. It's been happening for thousands of years. We're never going to understand it. They're always going to be fighting, none of which is true. And that people need to spend time learning something about the world, because it is connected to our world. We just celebrated the King holiday recently, and Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
Right.
And so it continues those are overlapping.
People do overlook that for thousands of years Arabs and Jews and Christians have lived in a state of brotherly and neighborliness for many, many years. And it was only recently that with the creation of the modern state of Israel that things just got to the point of explosion, where people were placed out of their homes and giving rise to this conflict. But let me not interrupt you.
That's okay. But that's connected to the fourth thing I have, which I think is critically important now, is to engage in interfaith. Really, more than dialogue, really sort of an interfaith, face-to-face wrestling with this issue. For so long, particularly in the Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue, this whole conflict has sort of been off the table. It's been something, because it's so painful, it's so emotional and so emotive, that it's something that we've often avoided because it feels like it's going to stretch our relationships or hurt them or even break them. And we're at a time point where if we're going to really have those relationships mature in our own country, not just over there, but mature in our own country, we cannot any longer allow this to be something that we put off the table because we're too afraid, if we're honest with each other, that I may lose you as a friend. And until we find the courage to have it out with each other, as you would, and to still love each other enough to not walk away from the table, then we're going to have a problem, not only in that conflict, but our own country and what will happen here as we continue to sort of be in this period of isolation and withdrawal from one another. And so that becomes a very critical piece. And the last one is advocacy. And I have two sort of things of advocacy. One is with media. There are too few instances where people can find out good information about the totality of the conflict. If you're someone who digs and likes to spend a lot of time looking at newspapers and on the web and watching a lot of different sources of television, you can find a fairly good coverage, but you have to be someone who's very intentional. Otherwise, you'll know nothing. You'll almost certainly hear about suicide bombs, because that almost always breaks at least a small headline. But you won't see much about the daily suffering of Palestinians, if anything. And so whenever there is a suicide bomb, it feels as if it comes out of a context of just quiet and calm, and people don't know the suffering that Palestinians are living under, and so it gives them a skewed image of the situation, and therefore it doesn't help them figure out how they can participate in solving it. So we have to be with our media. And the other piece of advocacy is with our legislature. I mean, it's the two pieces, and we have to start dealing with American policy, and saying that sometimes you may have an ally, but sometimes tough love is necessary when there's things that are wrong.
Do you think the need to advocate to our media comes from an intentional desire of the media to skew the conflict? It's certainly not balanced. Of course, our policy is not balanced, and perhaps the media is just reflecting our policy. But how important do you think it would be if Americans knew what most of the world knows about the oppression of living in a city of 40,000 where you're locked up at night, where if you have the very basic needs, they cannot be met, where you live with less than $2 a day, and you're really oppressed by from people from Russia and from Brooklyn, who are soldiers in the Israeli Defense Force, utilizing the might make right oppression to keep people dominated. If people came to know the extent of the oppression, they might better understand some of the ways that this oppression reflects itself, and sometimes very unfortunately, with respect to suicide bombings and other types of violence. Is this an intentional reflection of the media to just not give 10% of one side and 90% of the other?
Well, I suppose that probably each paper and each television station probably may have slightly different editorial decisions on how intentional it is and how deliberate it is. I think that certainly I see the cameramen from a lot of the major news agencies over there all the time, and so you'll see something and I'll ask, I know you guys are filming this. Why aren't these clips showing? And they'll say, well, basically they get cut in the editorial floor in New York or whatever, so that there obviously are some choices being made about what not to show. And even the way in which a story is told, usually it starts with the news service coming from the Israeli Defense story. I mean, that's the first news agency, the first news report that almost is always used as the basis of starting a story. And so that anything else comes in as either a subtext or whatever. And so the very framing of a story sets it up so that the Palestinians people are always usually the aggressor in the way in which the whole story is written. Certainly in some papers I have no doubt that that's intentional.
Well, I mention that because if I wonder how successful the Black freedom movement, Southern freedom movement, would have been absent pictures, support of the media about Birmingham and Selma. Those were images that reflected themselves in positive policy. If we perhaps had the same type of commitment to show injustice we could have a more support for a policy that is fairer and more just, and I would hope more peaceful. The church. Where is the church in America on these issues in the Middle East?
Well, as a church, we're really divided. We are a people divided. That the mainline Protestant, as well as pretty much the Catholic communities in the United States, have taken a fairly strong stance of, while recognizing the State of Israel and recognize its right to exist in secure borders, have also said that Palestinian people have no less right to the same thing. So advocating the creation of a Palestinian state, most of them advocating shared Jerusalem as a shared capital, as well as discovering and finding a just solution for Palestinian refugees, minimally. And so that we've taken a strong position of that, to basically calling for the end of the occupation as the root of where the violence all begins. And until you take the occupation away, we can't begin to deal with some of the other issues of violence and so on that's happening in the societies. But we also have we're not very as effective as we might be because we are divided, because there is a portion of the church that, for various theological reasons, whether they're sort of Armageddonists thinking that this is the end time, or who, in their understanding of either Revelation or the covenant with the Jewish people, that this is the land that God gave to the Jews, and therefore they get it, and the Palestinians just have to get out of the way. There's a whole variety of sort of theological reasons, but there's a whole section of the church that's completely supportive of the Israeli government policies, and feels that any critique is getting in the way of God's will. Mm-hmm. And that particular part of the church spends a lot of money and a lot of energy on helping to support and make sure that America, our policy, continues to be very supportive of Israel, with very little questioning of any of those policies.
Very little reflection on the teachings of Jesus as well.
It's a question I always have, but
which is important for a Christian, don't you think?
Yeah, we always see that the Jesus call to be peacemakers or to love our enemies doesn't always seem to be very much a focus of our discussions these days as Christians.
Unfortunately, and that's one of the reasons why I felt moved to have this program. What is tell us a little bit about settlements. I've heard of there's the refuseniks movement in Israel has become to talk in terms of the war of settlements. Mm-hmm. That the occupation and the involvement of the Israeli Defense Forces in the Middle East and the Palestinian areas, basically to maintain the settlements and to guard the settlements. Tell us a little bit about the settlements and how that may make it difficult to come to a just resolution here.
Well, I mean, with the beginning of the occupation, immediately after that 67 war in the West Bank and Gaza, the Israeli government began to immediately establish these colonies in the West Bank, basically moving civilian population into the area, basically creating facts on the ground. So that sense of when negotiations came, because the UN had already passed Resolution 242, which was calling for land for peace, that with people already on the ground, that maybe there'd be some places there for sort of negotiation. What that has meant, though, is that there's literally hundreds of small to large communities that dot the entire West Bank. In the West Bank and the East Jerusalem settlements together is about 400,000 Jewish Israelis living now in the Palestinian area. So that with these settlements, with the part that's already developed, with the part that's to be developed in their master plan, and the part that's actually under the settlement council's control, you're talking about 50 to 60% of the West Bank under the actual master plans of the development. And so that you're leaving, without taking those out and without taking away some of the area, particularly in the Jordan Valley that's under the settlement control, you're leaving 40% at best of the West Bank to the Palestinians, and that's not including East Jerusalem. And that area is completely divided and cut off from each other because of the settlements, and then to join the settlements you have the bypass roads, and of course now you have the wall. So you're having hundreds of little cantons of Palestinian, almost islands. It's sort of like islands in a sea of settlements. And so that they completely make it impossible for the Palestinians to ever look at having a viable state. That's really a state. I mean, Prime Minister Sharon has been talking about his support of a Palestinian state, but when you ask questions about what that means, he's talking about 40% of the West Bank, and most of it disconnected from each other with no rights to borders, no rights to water resources. I mean, it's a whole variety of things that the Palestinians still will not have control over. And at best is either be happy on the plantation or on the reservation. I mean, it's kind of, that's what's going to be left for people. And they're devastating. So unless the settlements are removed, then the world community has two choices. And Jeff Halper, who's the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolition, said this in early August, that if the settlements are not taken out within less than 2 years, we'll have reached a point where the only option for the world community will be to say, A, Palestinians, you get apartheid. That's it. We're done with you. Accept it. This is all the best that you're going to have. Or we'll have to go to pick up the anti-apartheid slogan of one person, one vote, and begin to advocate a one-state solution, because there'll be no way physically to have a viable Palestinian state.
I've heard that dynamic. Either it's apartheid or it's a one-state solution where the Palestinians are not permitted to exercise the vote.
Or you pull out, or you end the occupation.
Or yes,
I mean that's
let's not overlook that one.
Yeah, in the occupation, okay, and so then and truly end it.
Yes,
not sort of quasi end it, but truly end it. And if not, as you said, then you're going to have apartheid, and that's not acceptable. No. So then you have to have a one state where it is one person, one vote, and you start advocating moving from a national right to civil rights.
Well, there are realists in Israel and elsewhere, as well as people of faith in Israel and elsewhere, that are looking to find peaceful and just solutions. I appreciate your involvement, your ability to come back to the United States to inform us, instruct us, to lead us to where we need to go as a people of faith in particular, to solve this problem that's been with us for so long. And I want to thank you so much, Sandra, for being with us.
My pleasure.
I want to thank you all for watching this program. If you want more information about Every Church a Peace Church, please go to our website, which is www.ecapc.org. There's a lot of information, a lot of links about the Middle East problem and the solutions of people of faith. So seek peace, find peace, be peace. Bye-bye.
How long will it take till we realize we made a big mistake? If we turned our back on us. And how long will it be till the world can finally see